Okay, so there's a little music of me on the modular with my friend Andrew Pask. I always really enjoy working with him. Today we're going to talk to someone that I've done some performances with. He goes by the name of Har, which sounds hilarious when I try and say it because I don't have the right accent for it. So anyway, pardon my poor pronunciation, but I hope that you enjoy this. This is a really interesting interview of a person in transition. Thanks. Okay, this week I have the pleasure of introducing you, I think, to someone who I've actually performed with in the past. He goes by the performing name, all right, I'm going to get this really, Har.
There you go. Perfect.
All right. Great. It's like Harry without the re.
The official pronunciation guide is Harry, half of Harry with a Philadelphian accent.
Oh, excellent. That's the way to put it. That helps a lot. So he's a really interesting guy. I got a chance to work with him in a trio setting with Mike Metley. We did a performance at Planetarium, and it was awesome. And I'll never forget that night, you setting up your system, which was... I think you were working solely on bass that night. I can't remember if you had a guitar.
I had a 5-string bass that Mike provided, and I also had a guitar as well. And I kind of jumped back and forth between. Yeah.
But what I mostly remember is the ring of pedals around you, which was like 50 deep. It was unreal. But it was it always kind of stuck with me because you did really interesting open ambient stuff, but I never saw you actually get near a synthesizer, so it kind of tweaked my head a little bit. Then the other place that I primarily know you from is, for a long time you were I guess you'd call it a DJ or a content provider at Stillstream.
Yes, on-air personality.
On-air personality. There's the words for it. Those are the different ways that I know her, and I really wanted a chance to talk to him and find out, first of all, a little bit of how he got to where he is, and also, frankly, he has shared with me a little bit, and what we have here is an artist kind of in transition. So it'll be kind of interesting to hear about that process as well. So with that, I welcome you. Hi, Har, how are you?
Very good. Thank you, Darwin, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very excited.
Yeah, well, this is really nice. I always like having people that kind of like swing all over the map because, I've had a lot of people on here that are kind of doing ambient synthesis work. So to have somebody who's got some chops in doing that kind of music, but with completely different instrumentation is pretty interesting to me. Now, why don't you kick off by telling us a little bit about what kind of projects you're currently working on?
Okay. In a nutshell, really, I'm the sort of person who kind of likes to stay very busy. So there's my own solo works, which up until recently there's 6 different releases that I have as solo ambient, dark ambient kind of music. At the moment, I'm actually have swung off in a bit of a totally different direction, away from ambient, but kind of taking the atmospheric element of the ambient with me, and I guess we can kind of go on into that a little bit. That's where a large part of my the solo recording comes from. I'm also a member of as far as a recording band, I'm a member of the band Christus and the Cosmonauts, which is myself and synthesizer wizard, singer, computer music magazine writer Scott Soliday, who sings, programs, does all the synths, and I pretty much do all the guitars, basses, Chapman Sticks, a little bit of the vocals here and there. And we're getting ready to release our second album together. The last one came out in 2007. We're on Beta Lact Hammering Records. Right. And this has been an album that's really been in the making since the last one came out in 2007. So it's kind of a long journey.
Right.
And
long gestation period, huh?
Very, very, yeah. I mean, really, right now, Scott's working on the artwork. That's the other facet that he takes care of. He's an incredible graphic artist. So once that's all done, we're very excited about getting this out there because it's some really amazing stuff. And that kind of falls more into the progressive rock, art rock, experimental, electronic, psychedelic with a filbert nut,
right?
Whatever you want to call it, kind of thing.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because I had forgotten that you were a part of that project, and when I at one point was doing some gear trading with Scott, and he was like, I think I heard of you from somewhere, maybe my friend Hara, and I was like, oh yeah, that's where you would have heard of me from. And so he actually sent me that album, and I quite enjoyed it. Like you say, it's I mean, there seems to be the start of a renaissance of prog a little bit, but it's I hadn't really attuned to that yet, and it was really kind of an eye opener. It was really a pretty amazing piece of work.
Thank you. Yeah, the next one is it kind of continues in a similar kind of vein. Scott's an amazing storyteller, I mean, in general, just with the sort of songs that he writes. And we kind of went into more of an aggressive angle, shall we say, than the last one. It definitely things got a little bit heavier, a little bit more angular with the guitars. It's definitely not one of the more mellower things we've ever done, which is a good thing. And the next one, for all I know, will probably do like Appalachian folk or something just to throw everybody a monkey wrench. But
don't go that far.
Hey, keep people on their toes, you know.
Right.
So let's see. There's that. There's the collaborative stuff that I've recordings that I've done of recent. A couple of years ago, put out an album with Altus, Canadian artist Altus, who's an outstanding ambient artist who I've always been a big fan of, and he and I got together and did a particularly dark ambient project, which is interesting. Because Altus's music is it's just beautifully, very well orchestrated, and the darker stuff is not really what most people think of from him.
Right.
And we came out with some real slit your wrists kind of dark, and there's a project called Shadow District that we released on the Earth Mantra label. Okay. And that came out a couple of years ago, and it seemed to go over very well. I've also did an interesting project a couple of years ago with one of the label mates on Beta Lactam Ring Records, a Chilean artist, goes by the name of Thanatoloop. His actual name is Mikel Leroy, and he's part of a band called Unfesten Sagittal. And he's based down in Santiago, Chile. We've been talking for years that we'd like to try to do something, so we put out an album a couple of years ago. It was me, him, and also I believe his wife playing flute, and it was how to describe it? It was a kind of avant-garde, progressive rock, reform jazz, ambient noise-scaping, everything. And and the whole thing is literally just one. It's kind of like a story. It just goes through various cycles all the way through it, but it's really just one long track. And I really, really enjoyed doing it because it was kind of unlike anything I had ever done before. And that was really exciting. Did a couple other little things. Another good friend of mine over in the UK, guy goes by the name of Cousin Silas, who's a excellent ambient guitarist, ambient artist in general. He tends to be more on the darker side, and I've done a couple of tracks on a couple of his solo projects as well, playing guitars, and so it's been a lot of fun as well.
Sure. So you it sounds like you really have a varied kind of the ability to slot yourself into a wide variety of sounds. I mean, you've already right there mapped out a lot of different genres that you're dancing in. One of the things I like doing in the podcast is asking people what their background is, how they work themselves into the position where they are. And this sounds particularly interesting because it sounds like the answer might be insane. So you very well may be correct. Yes. So could you tell us a little bit about what you've gone through to become the artist that you are?
Well, let's see. It starts out with there was a piano in my parents' house. I started out formal training on piano, and it originally was for my sister to take piano lessons, and I kind of started tinkering around with it when I was very, very little. And my brother also had a guitar, and he was very much into the Ventures and surf music and stuff like that, which also had a very major impact on me as well. Just going to a slight aside, I also play live fairly regularly with a surf punk band that I've been playing on and off with for the past. We did the math after our last gig a month or so ago, and we've been playing on and off for about 30 years.
Wow!
So there's that in there too. But my parents wanted me to try to take the piano a little bit more seriously, and they were trying to convince me to take lessons with my uncle, who was a piano teacher. And I was like, I don't really know if I want to do this or anything. And at that point in time, my favorite song in the world was Theme from Shaft by Isaac Hayes. And my parents made a deal with me. Like, I'll tell you what, if you agree to take weekly regular piano lessons, take it seriously, you can learn how to play Theme from Shaft. And my eyes just went bing, and I was like, really? Well, okay then. So I was all psyched and happy, and I took piano lessons for many, many years. And ironically, I never did learn how to play Theme from Shaft. But that's pretty much where it started. Formal piano lessons, going all the way up through my teens. So I started out on keyboards. I started playing synthesizers while I was in high school. I started out with an ARP Odyssey, which at that point in time apparently was fairly rare. These days, every kid has a synthesizer or two just sitting on his laptop or something.
Right.
When I was I'm going to say about 15 or 16 or so, I started playing guitar and bass simultaneously. An interesting story behind that is I started learning from a friend of mine who I had grown up with all through grade school and everything. And he was taking guitar lessons, so he's like, "Oh, come on over, and as I learn, I'll show you some things." And I picked up a few things from him, and over time, he kind of lost interest in it and got more interested in buying guns, and collecting ammunition. So basically, he sold me his guitars and his basses so he can go out and buy ammo for his gun collection.
Uh-huh.
So I started kind of getting into playing. I started building up my guitar collection essentially to help feed a friend's gun habit.
Right.
So that kind of progressed from there. So let's see. I started playing professionally literally right out of high school. Instead of going to college, I made the mistake of, I'm just going to put this off for a year.
Right.
It's okay, Mom and Dad, and I'll go to college.
I'll get back to it.
There's this band I want to join. And literally the very last day of school, as everybody in high school was going around signing yearbooks, there was this guitar player who was like, "Hey, I hear you're a keyboard player and you've got a synthesizer. Would you be interested in joining a band?" I'm like, "Oh, okay." And off I went, and that turned into a career through most of the 80s of playing various cover bands, playing hair metal and pop and lounge music and all manner of things like that.
Right.
New wave, you name it. And that moved on. Now, that was my main instrumentation, was primarily keyboard through most of that time.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so I built up a pretty decent stack of keyboards back then. I think my biggest stack during the early 80s, I think I had 9 synths on stage with me at one time. This is back when I was really, really wanted to be Jeff Downes from Asia.
Right. Everybody did.
Oh, yeah. And then he saw the Fairlight and was like, I want a TV screen on stage, too. So, as soon as Roland came out with the S50 sampler where you can plug in a little monochrome monitor, I was like, oh, I am so there. Right. So I had that up on stage with me and everything. And I would play guitar. I would play guitar in various bands, but I never really got formal training on guitar. So trying to play guitar properly on cover bands, well, let's put it this way. I was actually fired from playing guitar twice over the course of the years that I was playing. And little by little, I also started playing bass, and I started focusing more on bass as far as that. And it seemed like I gravitated better to playing bass, at least in a rock band environment. So over the course of time, I wound up, I bought my first serious bass, which is a fretless Fender that I had. And I kind of started building up a local reputation as being a fretless bass player, kind of careening away from the keyboard end of things for a while. And I kind of let the keyboard settle down, and I started realizing, this is a little bit more fun than playing keyboards, because at least at that point in time, playing keyboards just felt like a desk job to me.
Right.
Okay, I'm stuck in this one part of the stage. I can't move. I even did the keytar thing during the 80s. I had the Korg RK100, and I was running around with like a 30-foot MIDI cable, like the dork I was. And but eventually I started noticing it was funny, because the bass player who I played with is this guy named Frank Pagano, who I consider my bass teacher, who taught me how to play properly in terms of right-hand technique and everything. And he said something one day that kind of sunk into my head. It was kind of like, while I was setting up my equipment, which would usually take like 2 hours to set up, and then 2 hours at the end of the night to break down again. And he said, every morning I get up and I go in the bathroom and I look in the mirror and I say, thank God I'm not a keyboard player. Because all I've got to do is I bring my bass, I bring my amp, and I bring my cable. I plug in and I'm done. And then at the end of the night, I unplug and I'm done. And something went into my head and went ding.
Sure.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because sometimes when you get so serious about a musical avenue or your own musical expectations, you forget that the thing's supposed to be fun.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's not if music, just like anything else, if it turns into a drag, I mean, you might as well just be doing the day job.
Right.
There's easier ways to make money and less of aggravation if you think of it that way. At least you're trying to look at it as a form of income.
Right.
But little by little, I just kind of migrated, at least as far as live performance is concerned. I'm in a rock band context. I started playing, just focusing on bass. And eventually I played in a couple of hair metal bands back in the 80s. I eventually wound up playing in the surf band that I'm now in, which I actually started playing in, I'm going to say roughly around the end of the 80s. And it's this guy, Mike Raymond, who I've been playing with on and off for about 30 years. And we both had a shared love of old instrumental surf music, like the Ventures, Dick Dale, Sandals. That's the other thing. If you ever look on my website, on my bio page, the first paragraph tends to confuse people, because I mentioned that the first 2 albums that I ever owned, which I inherited from my brother and my sister, was the soundtrack to The Endless Summer by the Sandals, which was this instrumental surf classic album, which really had a major impact on everything I do still, and Rubicon by Tangerine Dream.
Wow.
So you kind of combine these two.
Combo.
Yeah, so you get surf music and you get Tangerine Dream, and you say, wow, this guy is just a train wreck. And I've always had a very, very, very deep love of instrumental surf music. So Mike and I have been playing, like I said, on and off for different bands, and we started up again about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. And now we even have his 13-year-old son playing, doing utility man for us, playing drums and bass and guitar and keyboards, depending on what song it is, and it's fun. Like I said, that's the main thing. Like you said, it comes down to I've played in a lot of cover bands where you spend a lot of time and you get really bogged down in minutia, and it's like, okay, we're going to get the 4-part perfect Crosby, Stills, Nash style harmonies, and we're going to practice 3 times a week, and we're going to get everything razor perfect. And then when I started playing again with the surf band about a year and a half ago, we had not played in 15 years. And we were like, you know what? It was somebody had asked if we could put the band together as a birthday present from somebody. Like, want to get together and just do a one-off gig at this bar? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So we got together, walked into this bar. We had not played together in over 12 years. No practice, no nothing. Plugged in, and it was just like time never was there. It was just bang. We just went right back into it again. And we're laughing, and we're having a fun time, and it sounds like a 12-car crash and everything. We're like, we ended it with, well, thanks a lot. We'll see you again in another 20 years. And it was like, well, that was fun. Well, I guess that's not. What do you mean you want us to come back next month?
Oh, man.
And it's turned into a regular thing, and we still have not practiced in that many years still. And it's like, we don't want to spoil our purity.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, but it just comes down to, it's supposed to be enjoyable.
Right.
This is supposed to be something that you have fun with. It should not be a drag.
So you talk about having started off as keyboardist and moved into bass primarily, and then occasionally guitar, at least as an option to get kicked out of bands.
Right. Exactly.
How much of that translated? Because what's interesting is, I've known over the years, a couple of situations where really good studio players would double on keyboard and bass. There was something about that transition. Keyboardists found it very, I wouldn't say easy, but they found the transition to be sensible for them, but also something that they found really enjoyable.
Right.
What might be that connection?
I always kind of wondered about that, and the closest thing I can really think of is, if you think about it, at least playing piano, not so much synthesizers, but playing a keyboard. It's a percussion instrument. I mean, there's physical impact of your fingers hitting the thing. It can get a little visceral as you're kind of hitting the thing, at least when you're playing like a real piano. And when you're playing bass, it's a rhythm instrument. It's a very visceral instrument that you feel the impact of the notes. You feel bass notes. They always say when the bass player stops playing in a band, you hear it. Right. You may not hear the actual notes he plays, but when he stops, wow, you hear it.
Yeah.
It's a visceral feeling that you get when you're playing it. So it's a physical kind of thing. And I always kind of likened playing bass, in a way, from playing piano, because I have a tendency to play very percussively on piano. Especially, I would do things like "Lamb Lies Down" on Broadway by Genesis, which has a very hand over hand, interlocking percussive kind of playing technique. And I've always kind of theorized that a lot of us are kind of very frustrated drummers. So it's kind of like, piano, it's kind of a percussive instrument. Bass, it's a rhythm instrument, which locks in with the drums and the percussion. It just seemed to make sense. And when I started playing Chapman Stick, which is even more of a percussive instrument, and most people usually think of Chapman Stick as being some kind of a super bass, when in reality it's a full range instrument. You have bass notes, you have guitar notes, what they call the melody side of the instrument, but you play it very percussively. It's all done with tapping. And one of the first things that they in the lesson book that Emmett Chapman has is to literally strap on the instrument and do like drum rudiments on the instrument on your chest, literally, like, without even paying attention to the notes. And that seemed to appeal to me as well. So I guess really what it comes down to, the parallel between playing the piano or keyboards to a degree, and because I always, when I would play organ parts, like E3 parts in various songs, I tended to play very percussively. I guess I'm a frustrated drummer. That's really what it comes down to. And I guess there's a parallel there between the two of them. Yeah,
now, the interesting next step then, though, is that you are primarily known for doing this dark ambient stuff, which often doesn't have a clear percussive element to it.
Right. It normally does not.
It normally does not, right.
That's something, though, that while a lot of the stuff that I recorded and I've played and played with other people, it does tend to be somewhat beatless. But even in that case, I'm still thinking in terms of beats and structure, which seems to throw some people off, especially when, like, for example, if I'm doing a live performance, when I was doing the radio show, I would be doing a live performance, and obviously the only thing that people could hear was what was going through my mixer and going broadcast out through the stream. Right. What they didn't hear was that I have a metronome clicking, click, 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 a very, very solid thing. And what I was playing was not particularly mechanically, metronomic and very locked onto a beat, but I was still thinking in terms of beat and structure, even though I've always been, hear people talking about with ambient music is like, oh, it has to be beatless, it has to be ignorable, the whole enosification concepts,
right?
Which I honestly never really bought into. And
well, some of it is a little. I mean, the fact that the claim is it has to be ignorable is that's led to a lot of unfortunate results.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I mean, it's funny. A couple of days ago, I was up until about 2:30 in the morning, and I was working on my current project, and I was just kind of staring at the computer for a while. And I don't know what drove it to me. Probably because it was 2:30 in the morning, and I wasn't putting sentences together very well anyway. So I did the first thing that most people do at 2:30 in the morning when they're stupid, and they went on Facebook, and I posted up onto my wall a short 4-bullet treatise on why I had started moving away from quote-unquote pure ambient music. And one of them was, I'm too much of a goddamn ham to create ignorable music.
Right.
I'm sorry, a lot of what I do as an artist is, look at me! And I'll be the first to admit it. And the idea of being ignorable, it never locked into me. And the same with the idea of it's not supposed to have a beat. Well, people may not be hearing a beat, but I'm thinking a beat. I'm thinking in terms of build, structure, climax, release, tension, release, all through the thing. I'm thinking in terms of themes. I don't like, as one of the other bullet points on there is, I'm bored to death with stasis.
Yeah.
I don't like the idea of, I can understand the concept of drones and their purpose in ambient music, but when you have something where you've got 15 minutes that's essentially one note, I have problems reconciling that with something that I kind of enjoy. One of the things that I did with the radio show when I would have a new artist who would send music to me to play on the show, I had a test that I always did every single time. I would put it on. Let's say it's like a 15-minute track, which is kind of the equivalent of a 45 single in ambient.
Right, it's typical. Right.
And I would listen to it the first 30 seconds, and then I'd fast forward it, and then a bit, and I'd listen to it again, and I'd fast forward again. I'd maybe jump about 5 or 6 different times over the course of this thing. And the acid test to me was that if over the course of the entire thing of these 6 or 7 or 8 jumps over the duration of this track, if I heard the exact same thing at every point.
Right. Did you hear progression or not? Right.
Right, exactly. And it's like, if I'm hearing stasis, if I'm hearing exactly the same thing for 10 minutes, no. I'm sorry, this is not what I'm looking for. And that just never really clicked with me. And that's between that, the ignorable concept and everything else, it's one of the reasons why I kind of started finding myself fading away from that. And the idea of ambient music seems to be synonymous with soothing and relaxing music.
Sure. You are no longer doing the still stream programming. Right. Why did you leave? Was it just that you're changing tastes?
It was a combination of several things. It was partially was a change in tastes. Partially It was all those various things about not just ambient music, but kind of, for want of the better word, the ambient people, I guess you can call it. And this, please, anybody listening to this, don't take this as a generalization. But every genre, obviously, is going to have let's just cut to the chase, your share of blowhards.
Right.
And ambient music has no shortage of blowhards as much as any other genre of music.
Okay.
And I kind of have, like I said, I come from a harder background.
Sure.
I come from a punk background. I come from a metal background. I come from a prog rock background. The idea of something that's supposed to be full of spiritual goodness and light. You study your chakras and your previous life as a giraffe. Studying your crystals. Vibrational wonder. When you start hearing words like this, I'm as one of the other bullet points I put on that Facebook thing is, I'm about as new wave as Rob Zombie.
Right.
I mean, not new wave, new age.
Yeah.
And there's this unfortunate connection, which isn't really true. That the idea of when I started doing ambient music, and all the people I used to know in more in the rock circles were kind of like, oh man, I can't believe you're doing that Yanni new age stuff. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm doing at all.
Sure. Did you ever feel like you had to go way out of your way to focus on artists or even your own work that was that had more of an edge to it?
No, not really. And that might have been one of the reasons why I eventually kind of moved away from it, because I kind of felt a little bit at odds to what was kind of going on within that universe. It was kind of a given that when I started doing the show, I mean, I specifically started, the show was Nightscaping Radio. I specifically started the show with the idea that I wanted to focus on what I looked at as a niche within a niche, which was dark ambient music within ambient music itself. Mm-hmm. It was kind of literally the black sheep of what was supposed to be, most people thought of, again, the soothing, relaxing music. And a lot of dark ambient music is, it's about as soothing and relaxing if you like nightmares.
Yeah, right. I was going to say it's nightmarish. It's cinematic.
Which to me is something I enjoy. And I enjoy that kind of very visual. That to me is the biggest thing of all about ambient music that appealed to me. It's a very visual, intensely visual, vivid kind of music. And be it dark or otherwise, it generates immediate pictures in your head, or at least it should in my book. Mm-hmm. And it really just kind of came down to I would actually get people who would come running into the chat room during the show, because it would be first one I was doing like 2-3 hours of the show, and we would have people who would come in very, very upset, and they would be like, "Hey man, I'm trying to. I put on Stillstream every night so I can get a good relaxing night's sleep, and you're harshing my mellow, man." That's an exact quote. I actually got some people who actually said that, and. Yeah, so I finally made my official tagline for the show as, "I'm not here to help you fall asleep.
Right.
You know, if you're going to listen to my show, you've got a 50-50 shot that you're going to have sonic images of hell in a good way. You know? And either you're going to like that, appreciate it, or you may want to take a miss on this station for the next couple of hours. And there were definitely a lot of people who appreciated it.
Right.
There was some people who didn't appreciate it, and again, I guess it's my old punk rock mentality that kind of came back into play again, where it was okay. It's you expect this. Well, I'm going to go do this because this is what I do, whether you like it or not. A bit of an irritant, it's a little bit of a fly in the ointment. I understand, but
how long did you do the show?
A little over 5 years.
Okay, so you enjoyed being the fly in the ointment then, apparently.
To a degree, yeah. I mean, but the other main thing to me was that I was getting an opportunity, and this was the other real driving factor for me for really doing the show in general, was that it was giving me an opportunity to get a lot of music out there of artists who were into this subgenre, this niche within a niche that really I thought was being underrepresented. That there was, I mean, there's other stations out there like Soma FM, which has a dedicated channel, Doomed, which is very, very dark ambient. And obviously there's certain places that do that, but a lot of people, it's there's, shall we say, there's definitely certain sacred cows in the ambient field. Who, if you look at most ambient related radio stations, there's certain people who are going to be permanently glued to the top 2 or 3.
Right.
And nothing against that, but and everybody's kind of like, how come you're not playing XYZ sacred cow?
Right.
And it's like, well, they're doing very, very well. They're at the top of every single ambient chart in the world. I really don't think they're going to hurt if my little show does not feature them. And I try to focus on some much smaller independent, and it's kind of strange saying independent in a niche
market already.
Already, so it's like the independent ambient artists. But there was just so many amazing, incredibly amazing artists that I found and that I got to actually interact with and ultimately became really good friends with. Right. And my main driver for the show was the idea of I want to get this music out there and I want people to be able to hear this and they can have a kind of a place where they can come and listen, and if they want to come to the chat room, they can kind of feel comfortable to kind of drop any 4-letter expletives that they like in there without oh my gosh sort of thing. Right. And it was enjoyable, but and I definitely relished the time that I had with it. It was a wonderful experience, but it started becoming where it's just in terms of pure ambient music, like I said, I started feeling a little disassociated with it.
Sure.
And I started feeling a desire to, in a nutshell, to get back to actually doing songs.
Yeah, well, I wanted to explore that a little bit, but before we go there, you talked earlier about a number of collaboration projects that you had done. Mm-hmm. How many of those came about through connections you made because of the Still Stream podcast or radio cast?
Quite a few of them. Altus was one who I had known about Altus even long before I even had my own show, and I was always a huge fan of his music, and I was thrilled that when he wanted to actually work with me on that. And just for the record, we're actually gearing up to do a follow-up to that last project and to try to go even darker if possible.
Interesting.
Altus, I kind of got to know from hanging out in Stillstream before I even did a show.
Uh-huh.
And there was the whole chat room community and everything else that was involved with that. And I met a lot of really wonderful people doing that. And Cousin Silas, same idea. Dave Hughes is the name over in England. Interestingly, Cousin Silas comes from a bit of a punk background himself. And so we both kind of have that parallel understanding right. of the same kind of thing. And it's interesting because, I've found a lot of the people who seem to who enjoy the darker elements of ambient seem to have an appreciation for the harder parts of rock,
right.
metal, stuff like that, but not the other way around. Is what I've always found interesting. I know some of the heaviest headbangers out there who are very, very open-minded to ambient stuff and stuff like that. I know a lot of ambient people who are like, "Oh my god, I can't believe you listen to that guy."
Completely unopen to anything else. Sure.
Exactly, and it's like, you should have seen me back around 1983.
Yeah, well, it's funny though that that's the case, because if you really think about it, from and if we go to if we assume that I mean, I know there's a lot of ways to map out the history of ambient music, and there's even that guy that did the whole book on it, right? Mm-hmm. But I mean, I think one of the central threads of modern ambient is really coming from Eno's, the roots of Eno, but he kind of largely looked at it as an experimental music, not as a zone out music.
Exactly.
And so it's kind of funny that, given that it has become such a Catholic type of music.
It's become very straitjacketed in certain ways.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, and there's certainly many, many artists who don't feel that they have to absolutely adhere to the this thing that ultimately maybe maybe only really thought of just as an afterthought or a guideline, was not meant to be. These are rigid rules. Thou shalt not have a beat. Right. Thou shalt be ignorable as much as listenable. And it's like, well, or not.
Well, the thou shalt not have a beat, though. I mean, in to a certain extent, that was kind of a tenet of Stillstream, wasn't it?
I don't know. I mean, that was never. Never
certainly,
really
Earth Mantra, the label felt
it might have been
about that.
That might have been the case. Stillstream itself, I mean, even before I started doing my show, they were doing some interesting stuff. Like, I forgot where it was somewhere down south. They were doing a regular, like a monthly live streaming performance from this venue down there.
Oh, wow.
I can't remember what it was called, but and it was like all over the map in terms of weird experimental stuff that definitely, some of it was very electronic, very, very beat oriented.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and the strange thing that I started noticing is that a lot of people seem to have an interesting idea of what their definition of what ambient really means. I mean, for some people, ambient means the ignorable background music, very, very soothing, relaxing sort of stuff. For some people, ambient seems to mean a form of techno or a form of house or a form of one of the dance various substructures there. I've heard people basically do I've heard heavy metal ambient, where basically all it is it's bog standard heavy metal, but they throw in a couple of spooky sounding synth pads under there, and suddenly it's ambient metal.
Well, and some of the edges are actually pretty interesting. I mean, you take sort of like that heavy droney bassy stuff like Sano and some of these other people. I mean, that given squinted eyes, I mean, it sort of fits the genre if you allow it to be something besides Yanni's slowest songs.
Exactly. I mean, it's like rock, it's like classical, it's like jazz, it's like country and everything else. There's a million sub-classifications that go below it.
Myriad of subgenres, right.
Exactly. It goes absolutely fractal. I mean, it just breaks down and breaks down and breaks down and just keeps going. And to really say that it's just one thing was about as narrow-minded as you can really get. For me, I started finding myself, I was trying to break it down further as to what ambient music meant to me personally. And like I said, for me, it was never something about relaxing. It was never something about soothing. It could be. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say that a lot of my releases, they found very releasing. My father used to say that he used to find it very relaxing to be able to listen to my stuff, which helped him. Which cool. To me, I mean, that's wonderful. I'm really happy to hear that.
Right.
But it has to go with the understanding that was never really my intention. It was not my goal to create the musical equivalent of Sominex.
Right.
And I started finding it's like, this may not be the best descriptor for what I'm trying to do here. And it started feeling more like, is it ambient music or is it atmospheric music? Mm-hmm. And I started thinking it's more like it's atmospheric music. And the music that I find myself liking the most, and the stuff that I'm working towards now, which is more of a progressive hard rock, progressive metal kind of project that I'm currently working on. But I'm pulling over some of the atmospheric elements that I developed over time doing the ambient stuff. nothing goes to waste around here.
Right.
And the idea, and I always wanted. I love hybrids. I've always loved musical hybrids, which where you get to blend the various things together.
Right.
And the idea of trying to, I mean, like I said, I've heard ambient, gent, DJENT, which is a form of metal. It's not a monopia of, it's a whole lot of down tune, opened, thumping, palm muted notes. I love it. I mean, myself. But then there's ambient gent, and it's that, but they've got some eerie, spooky synth pads or some very heavily reverbed, clean guitar in there. And I was like, I kind of like the direction this is going, but it's kind of like it's coming from one direction, a metal musician's direction, the idea of it. I'm like, okay, but how about I've kind of come through a ringer here. I've done the ambient thing, I've done the progressive rock thing, I've done the metal thing, I've done the hard rock thing. I've pretty much done so many different forms. I'm like, I want to start bringing all of this together. I want to start for the current project I'm doing, I'm trying to, I guess for want of a better word, trying to fuse all the different things, even some of the surf elements, just in terms of some of the guitar tones that I like and I've always loved. I'm trying to bring them all together in kind of a unification here.
One of the things that's kind of interesting is that for a lot of artists who've got a varied background, I have some of that. Right. One of the things that becomes a concern is that you start worrying that you're going to be inauthentic in whatever music that you're working on, right?
True.
I can't let anyone see my my surf skirts when I'm trying to be a legit heavy metal player, or I can't let my heavy metal show when I'm trying to be a techno guy.
I think that's kind of where my my deeply inbuilt punk rocker kind of comes into play. It's kind of like, you know what? I don't care if you don't.
Damn the torpedoes, right?
As a matter of fact, knowing full well that this is going to annoy the living hell out of you, that's why I'm going to do it.
Right.
I mean, I'd even done some things when I was doing the show on Stillstream. I did some experiments with, basically it was ambient metal. Well, you remember some of the stuff Mike and I were doing when I was out there in Colorado with the ambient death metal ideas.
Yeah.
It was great fun. I just basically crank up all the distortion and the feedback, and I had my 8-string guitar, and it was just like then looping it and throwing it through 16 million reverbs and delays and everything all synced up together. Do that for a while, and some of the people thought that was really cool, and some of the people ran screaming.
Right.
And it's like, well, you know what? This is what I'm doing here, and the old quote, you knew the job was dangerous when you took it. Well, when you came in here during the show, you knew you had a 50-50 chance this could happen.
Sure.
So that never really bothered me.
That's interesting because that element of risk, I've often talked to people in the podcast about live performance and how one of the things I think is important for the audience is to experience the element of risk that
absolutely
that the performers are hopefully feeling, assuming they've got any to feel, and it's where it's sort of like the completely pre-programmed set kind of lets you down because there's not really an element of risk there. But it seems like when the element of risk includes everyone in the audience potentially hating what you're doing, there's, you're kind of like taking it to an extreme point, no?
I mean, it's like Robert Fripp when he started doing the original Frippertronics, where it's the idea of you have these two giant Revox open reel-to-reels feeding one another, and you're going to play that one note into it, and you play a bum note. Well, guess what? It's going to loop around and keep going and going and going.
Right,
and as Fripp used to refer to it as those performances, I remember in an interview, he referred to it as being fraught with hazard. And that pretty much sums it up, because it's like, well, you're flying without a net now. Because not only, if you make a mistake, not only are you going to make it, people are going to hear it, they're going to hear it again and again and again until you turn the thing off. So you got to be ready. It's the absolutely, the risk is the excitement. I mean, it comes down to, is a risk of anytime you do a live performance, is a risk you're going to screw up. And there's also just the 50-50 check. I stopped saying 50-50. You take that chance that you're going to piss off somebody in the audience.
Sure.
Not everybody's going to like what you're doing, and you got to be thick-skinned enough to be able to deal with that. I mean,
handle it right.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I've generated the thickest skin of all through the '80s, having to play in top 40 bands playing Loverboy.
Right. Yeah.
I've had shot glasses thrown at me. I mean, and I've had people. I've had fist fights break out right in front of when I was playing. I've been in bands and had things thrown. I've heard things called at us. I've seen knife fights happen. It's you either develop a thick skin and you think, okay, you know what, I'm going to commit to what means something to me, as opposed to what's expected of me. And I kind of thrive on the idea of doing things that people may not expect of me. People who have known me for a long time, I mean, musicians who I've played with for literally decades, they've kind of gotten used to the idea of, yeah, okay, yeah, he's going to be doing prog rock 1 minute, and then he's going to be doing surf 1 minute, and after that, he might be listening to bossa nova, and then he's going to be listening to Gordon Lightfoot. And when my wife and I have parties over here, we kind of confuse the living hell out of people.
I'll bet the DJing is crazy.
Oh, my wife's taste in music is every bit as eclectic as mine, which is one of the main reasons I love her.
Right.
But people come over and is like, okay, you might be hearing some thrash metal Testament or Megadeth 1 minute. You might be hearing Cuban Souls in the next. You might hear some surf. You might hear some Gordon Lightfoot, who I'm also a huge fan of. You might hear some Jobim, some Brazilian bossa nova, which I've always loved. Get ready to kind of flow with things, right, or get ready to be shocked out of your mind.
Get ready to surf the edges, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's always been something I've kind of thrived on, and it comes back to what you said at the very beginning. This is supposed to be fun, and if it ceases to be fun because you're finding yourself being forced into a mold that people expect of you, of what they expect you to be playing and the kind of music to do that's going to be coming out of you. You're either okay with that and you have no problems, changing yourself, catering to the whims of everybody else as opposed to what you want to do, or you're going to throw some of that back in their face.
Sure.
I mean, I think once again, Robert Fripp, I think he one time said something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing, there's a very close parallel between musicians and prostitutes in that they both tend to sell something very, very close and dear to them for way too cheaply.
Right.
And it's a very valid point, and sometimes people are willing to totally just upend and sacrifice whatever it is that they got into music in the first place just for the sake of people to pay attention to them. It's like, well, if people aren't paying attention to you doing what you like, then it's not up to you to change. It's up to you to find a better audience and maybe change whatever real or virtual venue that you're doing to get people to kind of appreciate it. I've done one. I mean, aside from when you and Mike and I did the performance out there in Colorado, I've done one actual in-venue live ambient performance, one solo performance that I did. It was at a wine tasting room near here. This actually was a place that the cover band I was in at the time used to play in as well, and I thought, hey, this would be kind of fun, this goes. So there was an experiment fraught with hazard.
Right.
I carted in, the giant pedal board that you've seen, and I brought along a rack full of stuff too, and I brought along my 8-string guitar, and the speakers all set up and everything. And you think, okay, now in terms of ambient music, this should be really perfect. It's a wine tasting room. And then to add on to that, I had a guy who actually worked at the wine tasting room who does live painting. So he was painting as I was doing like oil painting as I was actually playing, kind of as he was basing on what he was hearing in terms of imagery. So I thought, man, this is a win-win. People are going to love this at this place. Nah, not really.
Oh, really?
No, it did not go over at all. I mean, it started out with a mediocre turnout, and then people just kind of trickled out and left.
Wow. That's unfortunate. But it's actually interesting because there again, it's sort of like the riskiness. So when you're working like on Stillstream, doing your streaming show or doing radio work or whatever, I mean, you have your audience and they tune in because you are who you are. So there's actually quite a safety net built into that once you develop that audience.
To a degree, but at the same time, I mean, you've also got a total variable situation going in where you never know who else is going to be in there. And there's always a possibility, and I've seen it happen many times during the course of when I was doing the show, where you'll get somebody who just decides he's just going to come in to the chat room or whatever it is, and he is just going to freak out on everybody.
Wreak havoc.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing about being the fly in the ointment, and then there's another thing that just being an asshole, to be blunt.
Right.
And we've seen that happen. And thankfully, I had some people, some very good friends of mine who were in the chat room at the same time who, if I was doing a performance and I had both hands on a guitar, my feet on the pedals, and I can't really turn around and hit the chat room at the same time and try to do something to deal with it, I'd have other people in there who basically would have my back. They would kind of get that back under control again.
Sure.
But even in that kind of supposedly controlled environment, it's not that controlled.
Interesting. When I hear your music, I really think of it in sort of visual / cinematic kind of terms, right? I mean, I imagine interactions with visualists or whatever. But since you've done most of that personal work as part of the streaming show, have you found yourself in a position to work with many people outside of the musical arts? Not
really in terms of direct interaction while I'm doing it. That said, it has really driven me to kind of taking on more actual visual stuff myself. Case in point, that video that you saw.
For the listeners, I will post a link where people can see the first gauntlet being thrown down on your new project.
Right. That was kind of the other end of the spectrum for me, where like you said, you're right. To me, it's absolutely a very visual medium. I mean, visual music in terms of atmosphere, like I said, atmospheric music, to me is something it's music that paints a picture in your head, good, bad, or ugly. It's something, and as long as it's there, it's doing the right thing as far as I'm concerned. So sure. I've always been very, very interested in that sort of thing. I lack the actual ability to sit down with a pen or a paintbrush and actually draw or paint. My father was an outstanding oil painter, and he had even had his paintings done in various galleries around the country. And he didn't pass that part of the genetic to me to actually be able to do that. But give me the right software. Yeah. And basically, I became very, very interested over a number of years in first starting off doing work with 3D animation, which has kind of been something I've always been interested in. And general graphic design, motion design, stuff like that. And little by little, I started becoming more and more interested in visual effects, VFX, compositing, green screen work, stuff like that. And it kind of boils down to what I said before about the ignorability and that I'm just such a huge ham. And really what it comes down to is you know what? This is a solo project and I'm going to do the music. Well, I want to do the videos too.
Right.
I have direct pictures in my head of what I want this to look like, and I don't want to see it diluted and translated through somebody else's idea of what my music looks like.
Right.
Which may or may not be right. I mean, there's been too many times I've seen music, I've heard a song that I absolutely loved, and I'm sure everybody's been through this. You hear a song and it's it puts like a mental movie into your head. And anytime you hear it, it just kind of plays through the pictures of a story of some kind, and then you see the actual official video for it, and you go, ew.
Right.
That was a letdown. And so I was always kind of determined, I'm going to do this myself. So I put a lot of time and effort over the past number of years trying to develop that skill. And for better or worse, that's what the end results of is what you saw in that video there, which was I did all the video editing, the camera shooting, the 3D modeling, the compositing, the green screen effects, all number of different things. And there's a lot of staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning kind of stuff going on there, months and months of that. And it was one of those situations where when I finally saw the end results, it was exactly what I mentally pictured, going in tandem with the music that I've been working on for this project for the past couple of years. And made me feel okay. Maybe I'm on the right track here. Maybe I'm doing something right here. So that's kind of, I guess, if this is kind of a good segue here to go into what my current project is. It's kind of it's a concept album. Yes, it's a good old fashioned prog rock sci-fi based, sci-fi story based concept album. it's a story that I've basically have been writing in my head over the past 4 or 5 years, maybe, and going with it, all the visuals I kind of imagined too. And it was only over a certain number of years that I actually started developing the skills to actually make those visuals happen in tandem with the music. So I was like, no, I'm going to try to make this a combined project where there's the music and then there's going to be visuals. But at the same time, I didn't want to make an attempt at making a movie. You know what I mean? I didn't want it to be that linear. That linear is kind of along the same ideas of where I was saying with the music video being a disappointment, where, you know, when you had your own ideas of what that song should have looked like, you know, going total synesthesia there. You know, that song doesn't look purple enough. You know? Right. So, and it also kind of mapped into me for certain things where, in terms of, I'm sure everybody's seen it, where you've seen movie trailers or movie teasers where the teasers are just amazing, and they get you really hyped up about this movie, and you know, and they put it out like a year in advance, and you get all excited, and your mind starts filling in the blanks of what you imagine this movie's going to do, and what the storyline's going to be, and where it's going to look like, and everything. And then you see the movie finally, and wow, what a letdown!
Right.
You know,
video games do that a lot for me. The 2 year ahead of time video never really works out to be the game that I conjure up in my head.
Exactly. I mean, and that started getting the gears turning for me, where I started thinking is like, you know, I could try to make linear music videos, which is what everybody tries to do, where it's one song equals one story, or a whole bunch of stories for a concept sort of thing. But I started thinking is like, I really like watching movie trailers and movie teasers and stuff like that, because I like that idea of the blanks being left open for the imagination to fill in. But rather than try to eventually give them a finished product, the idea I started thinking is why not, as far as the visual end of this project, in terms of the videos and, you know, that end of the media, give it in little pieces. Literally treat the whole thing like a bunch of commercials for a TV series, or trailers or teasers for a movie that never actually happens. You know, so the idea is that you're left with little bits and pieces, little not so subliminal suggestions. You know, if you saw in the video, it's quick flashes of imagery. They're very, very strong images, but they don't complete. And the idea is let the person themselves fill in the blanks, connect the dots themselves, and that way they can kind of build up their own idea where this is supposed to go and what this is supposed to look like, as opposed to trying to hand it to them and ultimately taking the chance of, well, they're going to be disappointed in it. Well, let them kind of fill in the blanks themselves. So that's kind of where I'm going at with this project, and it seems to be coming together so far pretty well. The idea is that rather than, because like I said, I've been working on this project for a number of years, and finally I decided, you know, if I try to actually wait until I get the whole thing done, it's literally going to be the year 2063 before it actually is. And finally I was like, you know what? Why don't I just kind of, and some other people was like, well, why don't you just put out a couple of songs at a time? And started thinking, it's like, that's not a bad idea. You know, why not kind of go back to the old mindset of, you know, singles versus albums, right? Yeah, or EPs. So I started thinking of it as like, you know, why not just release like 3 to 5 songs at a time, and just make it like a multi-part series. So it's literally the idea I'm thinking of is making this like a serial album. So it's going a series of EPs for the thing. So it's going to be part 1, which I'm mostly finished with. I'm hoping to have done by the end of the summer, and I've already started putting together I've actually mapped out, like I said, I've mapped out the entire whole storyline, the whole story arc of this thing for years. So that's already in place. So now I've had most of the songs worked up. So now it's just a matter of actually putting all the pieces together. And it's kind of fun, because when you have something developing in your head that long, and then it actually comes to fruition, it's wow, that's kind of like the way I imagined it turning out. Hopefully. You hope that's the way it turns out. Sometimes it's like, oh no, that's just wrong. But it's kind of become what's been driving me more than anything else. And that was also another one of the factors why I left the radio show, was that I wanted to lock my focus down on doing this. And when you spend, I put a sizable amount of time, as anybody should. If you're going to commit to doing a weekly regular radio show, it's a commitment. You need to commit time to prepare and accept submissions from people's music and put together playlists and try to think of a theme or a flow of all the various songs. It's very easy just to grab a folder full of songs and do shuffle, play, done. But I wanted to try to present something that wasn't just literally phoning home and phoning it in. And I started realizing the amount of time I was putting into it was kind of slowing me down from being able to work as an artist myself.
Right.
And while it was great like I said, my main driving factor for the radio show was the idea that I wanted to help these other musicians get their music heard. I mean, it didn't hurt that I got my own music heard too, sure, but I wanted to help promote some of these guys and some of these people's music who otherwise were just kind of sitting there and nobody was really catching them. And I was always very happy to hear it's like, I got turned on to a couple of these guys on your show that I never heard before. And that was really the main driver for me. But after a while, if you do something like that long enough, if you are an artist yourself, you start thinking is like, I'm putting more time into promoting other people than my own music. And you have to kind of come to a conclusion or a decision at some point and think, okay, I can continue doing this, which is good. I could continue promoting other people's music, or I can try to focus on my own. And it kind of came to a balance point where it tipped, and I finally said, I know, hopefully not to sound selfish, but I needed some time to focus back on me again.
Sure, right. Of the people that I've talked to in the podcast, some people are builders and makers, some people are artists of different type, and you're one of the people who's been rather, you're really prolific, but you're also very focused on actually producing stuff. And so I'm curious to ask you, it's sort of a gear-related question, but it's not really, not at its heart.
Okay.
If you were going to be stranded on the ubiquitous desert island,
right,
where all you were going to have was time to create from now until eternity, what would you want with you? What would be the tools? Because you use every tool. From what I can tell, you've got a background in keyboards, you play basic guitar, you've got chops on the Chapman Stick, you have effects galore, you're a writer, you do video work now, which is, it's an amazing amount of stuff. If you had to coalesce it and if you had to do the desert island thing, what would you need to get your job? What would you need to make yourself happy for the long run, artistically?
I guess of course, in a desert island situation, you're not really given very much of a choice. It's like the ship just sank and you're stuck with this. Now, what are you going to make the best of it?
Well, we're assuming that there's like a power connector on this island.
Okay, that works for me. Sure, absolutely. I guess I would try, if I had to at least think in terms of a musical instrument that I would be able to say, I could sit down and try to get as many different. I guess let's go back to the visual analogy again. If I had to choose one instrument that that would be the only one I would be able to sit down with and be able to paint the most musical pictures with, in terms of a wide scope, it would probably have to be a piano. I would probably have to say, give me an acoustic piano, and I would just try to make the best of that, because there's just so many things you can get out of those 88 keys. Or the 88 string guitar, as I've heard it called. But it's one of those things where you can be very, very quiet and very, very gentle. You can be thundering. You can be very percussive. You can be very legato, very flowing. You can be orchestral. You can be very minimal. You can be downright bombastic, and you can do something as with as much space as a Satie piece. And I would say that would probably be where I would go with that. I would probably say, I could probably just sit down. Well, it's also the instrument I've technically played the longest, but it would probably be the one where I think I would probably be able to get the most out of. I could actually because I wouldn't want to lock myself down onto something where it's like, okay, this is a perfect instrument if I want to do nothing but ambient the rest of my life. Or this is the perfect instrument if I want to do nothing but thrash metal the rest of my life. Well, I'm not really into just one thing at a time. If I have one mantra that I've always lived by in terms of music, is there's too many different styles of music to just say I like one. Why be boring? No, I listen to a lot of different types of music, and at the same time, I want to be able to create a lot of different types of music. And I would probably try to think, what is the one instrument I could do the most with if I had to really narrow down and limit my options. So it would probably would be down to a piano as opposed to a guitar or a bass or anything else like that, because it would just give me the most sonic options, and it would give me the ability to be able to create the most varied terms of emotional output in terms of music. I mean, music is if anything, should be very, very emotional. Now, it could be very stark and cold, and that's still an emotion in and of itself. It doesn't have to be all hearts and flowers. Right. But I need to be able to do something that would give me that much of a variance, and I think I would say probably the piano would probably be my best bet in that case if I had the choice.
Interesting and awesome choice. Well, Harry, I want to thank you so much for the time that you spent talking to us.
Thank you very much.
It's really interesting to kind of talk to a thoughtful musician. You know, you've put yourself in a position to actually have to be mindful about so many parts of what you do, and it's really cool to be able to talk to you and have you verbalize them for us. I think a lot of artists struggle with some of these questions, and your approach has been really interesting.
Well, thank you, and I've had a wonderful time, and I really appreciate inviting me on here.
All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Great time.
And
thank you.
I will talk to you again soon.
Okay. Take care, Darwin.
All right, man. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
And there you have it. Yet another podcast in the bag. Thanks a lot to Hera for working with us on getting this pulled together. Thank you so much for your listenership. Thanks for everything that you've done. For those of you who are in the Midwest of the United States, please take the opportunity to see if my visits in your neighborhood are going to make sense. I'm going to be in Lincoln, Nebraska on August the 1st. We're going to be, I'll have more details later, but the fact of the matter is we're in a little makerspace there. On Sunday, we're going to be in Des Moines at the Des Moines Social Club. And on Monday, we're going to be in Lawrence, Kansas. Still haven't had a spot. So if you're in Lawrence and can help us out, that's great. Otherwise, for all I know, I might be just sitting in the bookstore trying not to spend money. So one way or the other, I hope that I get a chance to see you while on tour. And if not, keep in touch because we're putting together more stuff in the near future. That tour is myself and Mark Mosier doing live improv with these postcard-sized scores. It's pretty awesome. So I hope to see you there. Thanks for listening. Share this with your friends, families, enemies, like I always say. And I'll see you next week. Bye.